Watching the NFC Championship game yesterday, I couldn't help but think about how Andrew Berry referenced the Detroit Lions in his end-of-the-year press conference as a blueprint for some franchises that have never been all the way to the Super Bowl or don't have a ton of success recently, as some motivation for the Browns next season. So if you want to see the Browns go to Super Bowl 59, even though the Lions couldn't get it done, the Browns in the second half of this past season were capable of closing out plenty of games. So let's get 590 likes for the Browns going to Super Bowl 59 next year. Is Deshaun Watson recruiting Tee Higgins to the land? Welcome on into the Cleveland Browns Report. Matthew Peterson here, breaking down all the Browns news and rumors after the championship weekend. We have lots to talk about this entire week. We'll talk about the Ken Dorsey hire and whatnot. I'm going to save that for tomorrow's show because I already put this whole Tee Higgins coming to the Browns on the burner over the weekend. So make sure you check back in tomorrow for that. But let's talk about Tee Higgins maybe coming up to another AFC North team, because Deshaun Watson with his quarterback's coach Quincy Avery on their podcast talked about Higgins maybe coming over to the Browns. And here's what Watson said: "We're going to take good care of you. The Cleveland fans are going to love you to death. We got the Clemson ties. We ain't get to play with each other, but this is our opportunity. So, man, come on over to the land." And Watson before that made a gesture of, "You want some moolah? Andrew Berry and the Haslams, they sure know how to give you some money." But I would not read into this too much. Star players are always recruiting star players. And then inevitably, when it doesn't happen, we all forget about that tweet or something like that, and we just move on. But let's not forget last year, Deshaun Watson really wanted DeAndre Hopkins to come to Cleveland, right? At least he talked about how great it would be to have Hopkins come to the Browns. But that didn't happen. Life moves on, and we all sort of moved on from what about Watson wanting Hopkins. So yeah, I'm sure Deshaun Watson would love to have a lot of star wide receivers come to Cleveland. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, and it absolutely does not mean Andrew Berry is going to have a long, deep conversation with Watson about whether or not they should go after Tee Higgins. Andrew Berry is going to do his job. Watson's going to do his job. Watson is not at a point with the Browns where he can command who they sign in free agency, right? He's not 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers with the Jets. That takes a lot more time, and I don't think he has that type of leverage, or not even leverage, but that type of control in the Browns front office to pressure Andrew Berry into making signings or trades that he wants to see happen. Now, Tee Higgins, over his 4-year career with the Bengals, has been really, really good. I don't think you need me to say that. Back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. This year, he was banged up. He missed some time. Joe Burrow obviously missed a third of the season or so. So Higgins never really caught fire. But even in a down season, like 656 yards, 5 touchdowns in 12 games, if you prorate that over 17 games and knowing that Joe Burrow is only healthy for maybe 5 of them, I think people would be pretty optimistic about Higgins still having some big play factor to his name. Now, let's say you are dead set on the Browns going to get Tee Higgins. Well, if we look at their cap space, it's not great. It's negative $19.5 million. Now, I don't want you to see that number and think the Browns are going to do absolutely nothing this offseason. The Browns can make that number above or below the salary cap by moving on from some guys, restructuring contracts. I wouldn't look at that and look at it as a death wish, and the Browns can do nothing in the month of March. No, that is not the case, but it does definitely play a factor to how much they could potentially spend. And with the Browns having 7 draft picks and not having a bunch of early picks, only 2 picks in the top 100, they really have to make every single signing and every single draft pick count. Now, if I had to project what Tee Higgins goes for, I think if he truly walks in the open market and the Bengals let him go, he could get about a 4-year, $76 million contract. That pays him an average of $19 million a season. You guarantee about half of it, $45 million. So this is just a rough baseline for what Tee Higgins could go for. Now, let me get your opinion on this. Do you want Tee Higgins in Cleveland? Yes or no? I think he's a super talented wide receiver. I think Tee Higgins on a lot of other teams would would be the number one. But with Jamar Chase in town, he kind of gets overshadowed a little bit. But I think Higgins is the real deal. And I think wherever Higgins ends up in this offseason, a team is going to get a stud wide receiver. My prediction is Tee Higgins gets franchise tagged and then he gets traded. I just do not see a world where the Bengals truly just let him walk out the front door and they don't do anything. Now, there's no way the Bengals are going to be able to afford Tee Higgins. They just gave Joe Burrow, nearly $200 million guaranteed? We got some broke bitches down in Cincinnati. There is no way they can afford to pay Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. They had to pick up a licensing agreement on their stadium just to help pay some of the rent. So I don't see a way that Tee Higgins comes back to Cincinnati. The Bengals know that, so they're going to franchise tag him. And once they franchise tag him, a team will pick up the phone, give them a call, trade for him, just like how Davante Adams got traded from the Packers to the Raiders. Now, which team's going to pick up the phone and call the Bengals? It could be the Browns, but I don't think it will be. I think the Detroit Lions might call the Bengals. Watching the NFC Championship game last night, watching Reynolds drop key first downs, I think the Detroit Lions come out of that game thinking, we've got a lot of great pieces. We are very close to winning the NFC Championship game. And what held us back was we only had one good wide receiver in Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams as well. So I could see the Lions going, we'll give you our late first rounder for Tee Higgins. The Browns do not have a first round to give. So even if Cleveland had a slightly better offer, the Bengals, I'm sure, would rather have him traded to the NFC compared to the AFC North. But the Browns, once again, without a first rounder, I don't know how they could compete with the Detroit Lions first round pick offer. We're going to talk about signing Mike Evans or Calvin Ridley next up on the show. But first, today's sponsor is Tushy. Tushy has finally made going number 2 cleanup more hygienic and better for the environment thanks to their super simple, easy-to-use bidet system, which you can set up in any toilet in under 10 minutes. You can set up your home bidet and change your life forever. So for a limited time, our listeners are getting 10% off their entire order at hellotushy.com/chat, along with code CHAT to get 10% off. It's time to get rid of those skid marks once and for all. I love the Cleveland Browns. You love the Cleveland Browns, but that's the only Brown we should love. And you don't want to leave a trail of evidence from the bathroom back to your home or back to your work or wherever. And with Tushy, that won't be an issue. Now, take it from me, growing up in Tokyo, Japan, they love the bidet system over there in the Far East. And when I moved back to the U.S., I was blown away how the United States was like in the Middle Ages for going to the bathroom. And with Tushy, you don't have to go back in time. You can go in the future because this is the way that it's going to be done soon. So get that fresh out of the shower feeling at hellotushy.com/chat. Once again, that's hellotushy.com/chat. And use code CHAT at checkout for 10% off your entire order. It's time to back that ass up with some confidence. I put that link in the comments and description of today's video. Now, getting back on topic here, let's talk about some free agent wide receivers because Mike Evans, Tee Higgins, Calvin Ridley, Michael Pittman Jr., those are probably the 4 biggest names we're going to see unless we get some releases over the next couple of weeks. And 2 names have jumped out to me over the last couple of weeks, and there has been some chatter about the Browns having some level of interest in either Mike Evans or Calvin Ridley. Mike Evans makes a lot of sense because he fits what the Browns are looking for to help and complement Deshaun Watson. Calvin Ridley also makes some sense because he has some, I wouldn't say history with the Browns, but the Browns have done some homework on Calvin Ridley before. It never materialized to a trade, but maybe now in free agency they could land the former first-round pick. But let's start by talking about Mike Evans for a moment. He comes off yet another 1,000-yard season. He's 30 years old, and he's putting up 13 touchdowns. And when you think about what Deshaun Watson does well as a quarterback, it is extend plays, ad-lib, and then sometimes it's F it. I'm going to chuck it up down somewhere because I've got a super strong arm with precise accuracy, and I just need a big body receiver to climb up a ladder and come down with the football. And Amari Cooper does that super well. David Njoku is capable of doing that. And adding Mike Evans would make a lot of sense for what type of receiver does Deshaun Watson pair nicely with? Mike Evans fits the bill at 6'5", 231 pounds. Now, what does Mike Evans go for on the open market? He had a really good season. I'm thinking Mike Evans might cash in at 30 years old, a multi-year, 3-year contract, $80 million, $26 million a season. You guarantee over half of it at 50. That's a pretty penny to pay. Maybe a team is willing to give him a 4-year contract, but I think 3 years very much in range, and I'm not quite sure if the Browns could swing an $80 million, $26 million a season contract, given they are just about $20-ish million over the salary cap. Again, they can restructure deals. They can free up cap space. Don't look at that as the end-all, be-all. But $26 million is a lot of money to come up with when you're already $20 million-ish over the cap. Now, before we talk about Calvin Ridley, make sure you lock yourself in for the best Browns free agency rumors and news throughout the next few weeks and so. We are at 33,192 subscribers. We've been sitting on that number for just a little bit too long. So let's get to 33,200. We're 8 subs away. So if you're not subscribed, please consider going ahead and doing so. Switching gears, let's talk about the Jags wide receiver, Calvin Ridley, because Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer said the Browns were interested in acquiring Ridley before they ended up trading for Amari Cooper. So it's possible the Browns could circle back on Calvin Ridley and ultimately land both wide receivers they were looking for. Now, what's interesting about Calvin Ridley is a lot of people, and rightfully so, might think there's no way the Jags are going to let Ridley walk. They want to give Trevor Lawrence some weapons to work with. This might change your mind. If the Jaguars re-sign Calvin Ridley, they would owe the Atlanta Falcons a second-round pick. When the Falcons traded Ridley to Jacksonville, there were some conditions, and those conditions have already escalated to Atlanta receiving a third-round pick from Jacksonville. However, if the Jags re-sign Calvin Ridley, that would escalate even further to a second-round pick. So there is a chance the Jags are on the fence about re-signing Calvin Ridley, but what might push them to the no side of the fence is we don't want to give up a second-round pick for Calvin Ridley and spend a lot of money in free agency on him. That might be a double whammy if they're not over the moon about the guy. Now, what could Calvin Ridley fetch in free agency? Here's my rough estimate. I think at 29 years old, he is capable of getting a 4-year contract worth about $65 million total. That comes out to an average of 16.2. That's not going to put him in the top 10. That's going to put him much closer to number 20 than number 10. You guarantee about $35 million of it, and this could be something the Browns are able to afford if they want Mike Evans. But ultimately, we saw last offseason, there were a lot of guys the Browns were interested in. They got outbid, right? They wanted Javon Hargrave. He ultimately went to the San Francisco 49ers for much more than the Browns could afford. So I am sure that the Cleveland Browns are going to be interested in a lot of guys. But just like last offseason, they might not be able to afford all of their dream targets. So let's wait and see what contracts they restructure. I'm also going to spend 30 seconds here to explain what restructuring is, because every single year, I feel like we need to raise more awareness as to what a contract restructure is. A contract restructure is not the player agreeing to take less money, right? That's not what it is. Or people are going to look at Deshaun Watson's fully guaranteed contract and go, you can't restructure it. You guaranteed all of it. The guarantee is not what the restructure is. A contract restructure simply means you are taking a player's base salary and you are prorating it over the remaining years on their contract. My best example is it's like the Panama Canal, right? The boat enters, the water level rises in one lock and lowers in other, or vice versa. You are lowering some players' cap hit for this season and raising future cap hits. Why do you do that? Why do you kick the can down the road? Well, for starters, the cap is always going to go up. So while you might be looking at raising a cap hit for 2025 and 2026 is a scary thing, when the cap goes up those years, that cap hit percentage-wise is not as big as it is right now. Another reason is, if you think you're going to re-sign the player or extend them, you can spread those cap hits over the future years of that contract extension. But if you think you might end up releasing that player before their contract is up, it's not the best idea to restructure a player, because now you are stuck with a big bill at the end of their contract and you have to cut the guy because you don't even want him on your team anymore. So let's wait and see what the Browns do restructure-wise, and I think that will be a good indicator. for how aggressive the Browns plan to be in free agency. But between Mike Evans and Calvin Ridley, if you had to pick a receiver, which one would it be? Ridley's a little bit younger, so you give him a pro for that, but I'm taking Mike Evans every single day. 6'5", the guy can climb a tree and come down with the football. That is what Deshaun Watson needs. I'm not too optimistic about the Browns being able to afford Mike Evans, but if they can find a way to get it done, that would be an A-plus signing in my book. Now, if you're looking for a more cost-friendly option, what about Noah Brown? With C.J. Stroud this year in Houston, in only 10 games, he had 567 yards and 2 touchdowns. I'm not asking for Noah Brown to put up the same type of numbers that Mike Evans can, but if Mike Evans gets $26 million a season, you can get Noah Brown for $4 to $5 million a season. Like, we're just talking bang for your buck. Noah Brown might not be a bad option if Cleveland cannot afford Evans, but they still want to get a big body receiver, and 6'2" and 225 pounds definitely checks that box. Let's get you guys on your way with Pick a Card. I've got producer Matthew McCullough hanging out with me on this Monday afternoon. Big Tex?
Yes, sir.
Which card are you thinking?
Let me do the Ace of Spades. That's my guess.
Ace of Spades? I
Yes,
like
sir.
it. That's a good Torchies order right there, too. If you know, you know. I'm going to go with a... Mike Evans is 13. That doesn't really work out. How about a Jack of Clubs? Jack of Clubs. I was thinking this. Queen of Clubs. I was just thinking quick math. Like if Jack is 11, Queen would be 12. I was like, I guess I should hit the rim in back-to-back card pickings. Okay. That's it for today's show. We'll let you guys get on out of here. Enjoy the rest of your day. Go Brownies.